Hey guys, I'm Chris Buck and a very warm welcome to Friday Fretworks. And this week we're going to be taking a look at a rather interesting point in Beatles history, and that is of course the guitar solo from While My Guitar Gently Weeps, taken from the White Album. Now, it's not exactly a well-kept secret at this point that the guitar solo on that track was played by Eric Clapton, despite some initial reluctance on his part to actually get involved even recording with the Beatles. However, we'll get onto that later on. Today's video is going to be all about trying to replicate that rather distinctive tone, looking at the gear that was more than likely used, rather unusual effects, and the whole process of recording. Now, the first port of call to nailing any specific guitar tone is going to be to take a look at the guitar that was used. And in this case, we have a 1957 Gibson Les Paul Standard. As all standards did in 1957, started life as a gold top. However, sometime in around about 1965, was refinished by Gibson under the instruction of its previous owner, Mr. Rick Derringer, a name you may know from Edgar Winter and Steely Dan, to a more current, it was kind of what Gibson were doing at the time on their SGs, a cherry red finish. Eric Clapton then bought the guitar in early 1968 from Dan Armstrong's in New York, whilst on tour with Cream, before bringing the guitar back to London, then giving it as a present to George Harrison in August of 1968. The guitar's first public outing as a Beatle guitar was on September 4th, 1968, at Twickenham Studios from promotional clips for Hey Jude and Revolution. However, it was 2 days later, on September 6th, when the guitar got arguably its most famous usage as the guitar that was used on the solo of While My Guitar Gently Weeps. George Harrison then later recalled, "I was with Eric and I was going into the session and I said, we're going to do this song. Come and play on it." Eric said, "Oh no, I can't do that. Nobody ever plays on Beatles records." I said, "Look, it's my song and I want you to play on it." So Eric came in and the other guys was good as gold because he was there. Also, it left me free to do the vocal and to play rhythm. We used to hang out a lot at that point, and Eric gave me this fantastic Les Paul, which he plays on that date. Now, to approximate this sound, I've used my 2001 Les Paul Standard, equipped with PAF-style pickups, again true to what would have been in that guitar, and I'm using it on the bridge pickup, to which to my ears sounds closest. Now, the next port of call is going to be to take a look at the amp that was more than likely used. And it's at this point there is a certain level of ambiguity, and we're going to have to make some leaps of faith. Now, around about this time, the Beatles were pretty much exclusively using Fender amps. You can see this on the filming session from 2 days prior, with their deal with Vox having run out a few years earlier. So, in that sense, given that Eric actually came to the session unprepared, it would seem, with very little idea of where he was going, stand to reason that it was a Fender amp that was used on this recording. However, this interview with Eric Clapton from a few years ago does imply that it was a Marshall.
I played this on Guitar Gently Weeps, you know. When he asked me to do the session for Gently Weeps, I did because it sounds right, because he picked me up from where I was living in London and said, "We're going to go over to the studio. Do you want to come along?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, I want you to play on something." And I didn't have a guitar because I was just got in the car with him, you know. And so he gave me this to play. So he could have put a Marshall in there, knowing that he was going to ask me to come and play, you know, just to make it like, well, we got this and we got that, you know.
However, then rather confusingly, that same interview a few minutes later, Eric also implies it was a Fender Tweed Twin.
My ideal setup for a long time then was a Les Paul through a Fender Twin, only because that sounded like the Marshall, because the original partnership was a Les Paul through a small Marshall, the Blues Breakers setup, and that was pretty hard to. I never got a Marshall again. They were all unique. And what I liked about discovering the twins was that, you know, they were pretty much made to a similar pattern. You know, you get a 50s tweed twin and it would sound just like the last one or the other one, you know. And consistent and great for Les Pauls, really thick, you know.
Now, this is where I'm going to edge my bets and say that I think this is a Marshall on the recording. I could well be wrong, and again, as I said, this is open to interpretation, but this seems a distinctly Marshall-esque mid-range on the isolated guitar track, which has some definite commonalities with the Blues Breakers record that was released in 1966, where Eric was using a JTM 45 combo. And for that reason, I'm going to be using a Marshall emulation, a Plexi-style emulation within Guitar Rig, to really try and nail that tone. Next up, and arguably the most crucial point in really nailing this sound, is going to be the distinct effect that was used on the guitar track. Now, it's kind of myth and legend at this point what was actually used on this track. A very common misconception is it was a Leslie speaker. It's very easy to see why that would be assumed. It has some kind of phasey qualities, definitely in common with the Leslie. However, the specific effect on this track was ADT, artificial or automatic double tracking, invented in the 60s at Abbey Road by engineer Ken Townsend, who very beautifully describes that effect here.
I knew the J37 because when we overdubbed voices, we sent off from the sync head of the J37, and I thought to myself, if I took the output from the sync head of a J37, which is excellent quality, superb quality, and I then took the replay head and I took that off and fed it into a BTR2, and if I fed that at 30 inches per second, that would shorten the length to about 1.5 inches. But not only that, I thought, well, if I then put that onto frequency control, I can adjust the speed of the BTR2 to be almost exactly the same as the 2. And I've got 2 signals. One is the original signal, and then the same original signal, but delayed by about 100 milliseconds, I think. And then that delay, and I can put the 2 together and see what it sounds like.
In regard to why it was applied to the solo, George Harrison again explains here. We listened back to the solo and Eric said, there's a problem though. It's not beatly enough. So we put it through the ADT to wobble it up a bit. Now, the task of actually wobbling it up a bit fell to engineer Chris Thomas, who was on hand, who again recalls the experience. I was given the grand job of waggling the oscillator on the Gently Weeps mixes. Apparently, Eric Clapton insisted to George that he didn't want the guitar so typically Clapton. He said the sound wasn't enough of a Beatles sound, so we did this flanging thing, really wobbling the oscillator in the mix. I did that for hours. What a boring job. Now, the closest I've been able to get to replicating this sound is through the Waves Real ADT plugin, a plugin that was designed specifically to emulate this effect. It's worth mentioning at this point I have no affiliation with Waves whatsoever. I simply downloaded the 7-day free trial to see how close I could get, and I've been incredibly impressed. It took a little bit of tweaking. The plugin's kind of default setting is to flip it into a stereo image. However, listen to the isolated guitar track from the original recording. It is distinctly mono, but with a little bit of tweaking, I would like to say I've got very, very close. Couple that then with using the Match EQ plugin within Logic, which analyzes the EQ fingerprint of the original recording and then applies that to your own. Again, it all definitely adds up to really get you in the ballpark of this recording. Of course, the last thing to really do then is a side-by-side comparison of the original guitar take by Eric Clapton and my own humble attempt at really recreating this sound. And there you have it. Hopefully you found this video interesting. As ever, I've been Chris Buck. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon down below. Give the video a thumbs up if you haven't already. And I shall see you next week for another episode of Friday Fretworks. Cheers, guys. Take care. Wash your hands. And I'll see you soon.